I want to start today with a question that it feels incredibly simple. But if you actually sit with it for a minute, it's maddening.
Oh, those are the best kinds of questions.
Right. So here it is. If objectivity means that everyone sees the exact same reality, why is it that two smart, rational people can read the exact same news article, look at the exact same data, and end up screaming at each other?
Yeah, it's the fundamental problem of the modern world, isn't it?
Exactly.
We operate on this assumption that facts are solid, like rocks. You pick up a rock, I pick up a rock, we both agree it's a rock. But the material we're looking at today suggests we actually treat facts more like clay. We sort of mold them to fit the shape of our own minds.
And that brings us to the topic of today's deep dive. We are unpacking a pretty dense philosophical dialogue called the Sterile Lens. And I have to admit, reading through this stack of sources, it made me question my own grip on reality a little bit.
I think that's the intended effect.
We are looking at history, neuroscience, and some very practical psychology to answer one massive question. Does true objectivity actually exist? Or is it just a polite social agreement we make to keep society from, collapsing?
That is the core mission here. And I think what makes this specific deep dive so compelling is that it really challenges the pedestal we put science on.
Yes, absolutely.
We tend to view science as this cold, robotic, perfect process. Input data, output truth. But the sources we're analyzing today remind us of a tension we usually ignore. Science demands objectivity, but it's conducted by human beings. And human beings are messy.
Very messy.
We're filled with ego, bias, and what the source calls the fine dust of subjectivity.
Fine dust. I actually highlighted that phrase in the notes. The idea that subjectivity isn't this big boulder you can step around, it's particulate matter. You inhale it every time you take a breath. It's just in the air.
Exactly. You don't even know it's there until it's already in your system. And the source argues that you can never truly hold your breath. You just have to learn how to filter it.
So let's get right into the evidence. Because the source material doesn't start with a lecture or a math formula. It starts with a story that feels less like a science textbook and more like a gothic horror novel.
It really sets the scene, doesn't it? It frames the whole discussion beautifully.
It does.
Yeah.
Picture this. It's the late 19th century, Spain. It's the middle of the night. Moonlight is streaming down on an old cemetery wall.
Very cinematic.
And two figures are climbing over that wall to break into the graveyard.
And to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't random vandalism. This is calculated. They brought tools.
Right. It is a literal grave robbery. But here's the twist that caught me off guard. One of the robbers is the respected town doctor, and the other one is his 16-year-old son.
A son who, by all accounts, was really struggling.
From what the records show, this kid was a total disaster at the time. He was failing school, he was rebellious, he was getting into street fights, just completely lost.
Now, most people hearing that setup would assume they were stealing jewelry from the coffins. Or maybe bodies to sell to medical schools, which was a huge black market back then.
Sure, that makes sense.
But that wasn't the motive here.
No. The father, the doctor, was stealing bones. He wanted to take them home so he could force his son to draw them.
It's wild.
He was using grand larceny to teach his kid anatomy. He just wanted to ignite a spark of curiosity in this kid who everyone else had basically written off as a failure.
It's an extreme parenting method, to say the least. Like, get in the car, kid, we're going to steal a femur.
Right.
But this is where the history gets incredible. Because that rebellious teenager, that was Santiago Ramon y Cajal.
The father of modern neuroscience.
The very same. The man who would go on to win a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
The man who literally drew the maps of the human brain that we still use today.
It's amazing.
And it all started with stolen bones in a moonlit graveyard. It just goes to show that the path to scientific truth is often paved with very weird, very human behavior.
It's a great origin story, but looking at the source material, this isn't included just to be a fun fact to bring up at parties. It sets up a conflict that completely undermines our idea of scientific objectivity, because Cajal ends up in a feud that is legendary.
Right. This leads us to the Nobel feud, and this is crucial for the listener to understand, because it shows how two geniuses can look at the exact same thing and see two completely different realities.
So walk us through it.
Okay, so fast forward a few decades. Cajal has done this groundbreaking work, but he has to share the Nobel Prize with an Italian scientist named Camillo Golgi.
And these two were not friends. They were rivals in the bitterest sense.
That is putting it mildly. They had completely opposing theories about the fundamental structure of the brain. Kachal, our former grave robber, believed the brain was made of individual cells, neurons, that talk to each other across tiny gaps.
Which is what we now call the neuron doctrine.
Exactly.
Okay. And Golgi, what did he think?
Golgi believed the brain was one big, continuous mesh, like a spider web. He called it the reticular theory. He thought everything was physically connected, like the veins in a leaf. He thought the idea of gaps between cells was just ridiculous.
So they're at the Nobel ceremony, the absolute pinnacle of scientific achievement, the most objective stage in the world, right? Stockholm, tuxedos, the whole deal. What happens?
It turns into a total disaster. Golgi goes up to give his acceptance speech first. And instead of saying thank you or talking about his own work, he spends his time attacking Kachal, right there on the stage.
Oh, wow.
He tries to tear down the work of the man sitting right next to him.
I can't even imagine the tension in that room. You're sitting there holding your Nobel Prize, and the guy next to you is just trashing you to the entire scientific community.
And Kachal is just sitting there fuming. The accounts say he sat in silent contempt. He later wrote in his autobiography that Golgi's views were a result of, quote, intellectual laziness. And he even accused him of distorting images to fit his theory.
But here's the thing that I really struggled with when I was prepping for this, and I want to make sure I get this right. They were both using the exact same technology, right?
Precisely. That is the insight we need to grab onto here. They were looking at the same samples of nerve tissue. They were using similar microscopes. In fact, Kajal was actually using a staining technique that Golgi invented.
That's crazy.
But Golgi saw a web, and Kajal saw individual cells.
How is that physically possible? I mean, either there is a gap between the cells or there isn't. It's biology, not poetry.
You would think so. But the source argues that we don't just see with our eyes. We see with our theories. Our prior beliefs act like a filter. Golgi's theory didn't allow him to see the gaps between the cells, so his brain literally just filled them in.
He saw what he expected to see.
Exactly.
Okay.
Even at the Nobel Prize level, the sterile lens of objectivity was completely covered in the fingerprints of their egos.
So what you're saying is that observation isn't passive, it's an act of construction. We build the world in our heads as much as we observe it.
Yes. And if the guys winning the Nobel Prize can't even agree on what they're looking at under a microscope because their egos are in the way, what hope do the rest of us have when we're just scrolling through the news?
It raises a pretty frightening question. Is scientific truth actually true, or is it just the winner of a debate?
Well, let's unpack that, because the source material brings up another famous example that I think really drives this home. The Eddington experiment of 1919.
Oh, this is legendary in physics.
It is. This was the moment that supposedly proved Einstein was right and Newton was wrong about gravity bending light.
I remember this from school. Arthur Eddington goes to an island off the coast of Africa to photograph a solar eclipse. The idea is that the sun's gravity should bend the starlight passing by it. If it bends a little bit, Newton is right. If it bends a lot, Einstein is right.
Simple, clean, objective. The data speaks for itself.
Right. It's the ultimate test.
Except it didn't speak for itself. The source highlights that the data Eddington got was actually a mess. It wasn't beautiful data at all. He had multiple telescopes. Some of the photos supported Einstein, but some of the photos actually supported Newton.
Wait, really? I was never taught that part. So what did he do? Did he average them out or something?
No. He made a choice. He discarded the data that supported Newton.
He just threw it out. Isn't that fraud?
That's the million-dollar question. Eddington claimed there were technical issues. He said the images were blurred or that there was heat expansion in the mirror of the telescope that took the Newton photos.
Okay, so maybe he had a valid reason.
Maybe. And look, he might have been right, but the source points out that he didn't have full proof that those photos were bad. He just trusted the Einstein data more. He kept the data that favored the outcome he already believed in.
That sounds suspiciously like cherry picking.
In hindsight, we know Einstein was right. So history treats Eddington as a hero who saw the truth through the noise. But in that exact moment, it wasn't purely objective. It was a subjective decision made in the gray zone.
The gray zone.
Yeah. He had to decide which data was reliable and which was noise. And that decision is always human.
It reminds me of the bit in the notes about snowflakes. We all have this mental image of snowflakes being these perfect, symmetrical crystal stars, like the decorations you see in a department store during the holidays.
Yes. The snowflake myth. It's a perfect parallel.
Because the source says that's largely because early photographers retouched the photos.
It's a classic example of idealization. The early researchers, like Wilson Bentley, really wanted to show the ideal snowflake. So if a flake was lopsided or ugly, they fixed it in the darkroom. Or they just didn't publish it.
They just hid the ugly ones.
Exactly. Later researchers showed that real snowflakes are often messy, asymmetrical, and just chaotic. But we still believe in the perfect snowflake because that's the image we were sold.
This is all a bit unsettling. You look at a scientific report and it looks like steel. It's got numbers, charts, procedures. It looks cold and hard. But you're saying that underneath that steel, it's actually kind of soft.
I wouldn't say soft, I would say constructed.
Yeah.
The source makes a brilliant distinction here. Subjectivity hides in the selection. The report itself looks objective, but the process of deciding what makes it into the report, which data is good, which photos are clear, that is where the human element lives.
So if subjectivity is unavoidable, does this mean science is fake? Are we just making it all up as we go?
No, and this is the crucial pivot the source makes. It's not that science is fake, it's that we misunderstand what objectivity is in the first place. We think objectivity is a state of mind, like a robot mode we can just switch on.
Right.
But the source argues that objectivity is actually a social agreement.
A social agreement. Okay, let's break that down.
Think about the difference between private reasoning and public argument. Inside your own head, your private reasoning, it's a mess. It's fear, hope, ambition, bias. It's, I want to be famous, or I hope this drug works because I've spent 10 years on it. You can't get rid of that. That is the engine of human drive.
Right, you can't just lobotomize your desires. If you did, you probably wouldn't have the passion to do the science in the first place.
Exactly. But when you step into the public sphere, when you write that paper or give that speech, you have to follow a rule. You have to sterilize your argument.
Sterilize, like in a surgery.
Yes. You have to strip away the I hope and I feel. You replace them with the data suggests. Or, under these conditions, we observed X.
So it's almost like etiquette.
It is exactly like etiquette,
Yeah.
or a moral force, as the source calls it. It's a rule that says, if you want us to listen to you, you have to wash your hands first. You have to scrub off your personal ego before you touch the truth in public.
I love that metaphor. It's not that the scientist is inherently clean, it's that the rules force them to act clean.
And there's another metaphor from the text that I think is even more powerful. It describes objectivity not as a self-driving car that automatically finds the truth, but as a brake.
A brake, like on a car.
Yes. Imagine your brain is a car speeding down a mountain road. Your bias, your excitement, your desire to be right, that's the engine. It's driving you forward fast. Objectivity is the brake. It doesn't steer the car, but it stops you from driving off the cliff when you get too impulsive.
That makes so much sense. So objectivity is the mechanism that says, whoa, hold on, let's check that again.
Precisely. It keeps us safe. It allows us to disagree without violence. If we didn't have these rules of sterilized argument, we'd just be yelling at each other, or worse. It's essentially a peace treaty.
Okay, so this is all fascinating for science history. We've got grave robbers, Nobel feuds, messy snowflakes. But I want to pivot to you, the listener, because most people listening right now aren't publishing papers on astrophysics. They are trying to navigate office politics or arguments with their spouse or just trying to understand the news.
And that is why I love the second half of this source material. It takes this high-concept philosophy and gives us 5 practical lessons for what it calls a tiller life. Someone who actively cultivates the truth in their own life.
Right. So let's run through these because I think they are super applicable. Lesson number 1, separate observation from interpretation.
This is the foundation. The source gives a great relatable example. He hasn't texted me back in 3 days.
Okay, that's a fact. That's an observation.
Yeah, right. But your brain instantly adds, he disrespects me, or he is angry at me.
Yeah.
That is the interpretation. The source argues that being awake means spotting the exact moment you add that meaning to the event.
It's so hard to do in the moment, though. We do it instantly. I mean, we feel the anxiety before we even realize we've interpreted the silence.
We do. But the practice is to catch it. To say, okay, the fact is he hasn't texted. The story I'm telling myself is that he hates me. Just noticing the difference is a superpower. It stops the spiral. You reclaim control over your own reaction.
Okay, that leads right into lesson number 2. Identify blind spots.
This one hurts a little bit to think about. The question you have to ask yourself is, do I prefer information that makes me feel right? Or do I prefer information that makes me change?
Oof. Yeah, I think 99% of us choose feel right every single time. It feels good to have your bias concerned.
Of course. It's dopamine. It literally feels like a drug hit. But the source says that true objectivity in daily life is noticing that preference. If you read an article and you feel a rush of, aha, I knew it, Those people are idiots.
Mm,
That is a major warning sign. You're feeding your ego, not your understanding.
that's a good rule of thumb. If it feels too good, doubt it. What about lesson 3? Because this one seemed the most difficult to actually do. Sterilize important arguments.
This goes back to that social contract we talked about. When you are fighting with your partner or a colleague, the instinct is to use "I feel" or "you always." The advice here is to drop the ego just for a moment. State the data, state the conditions. And this is the kicker: state where you might be wrong.
State where you might be wrong. That sounds like losing the argument on purpose.
It sounds like losing, but it's actually how you give the truth room to breathe. When you admit uncertainty, you lower the other person's defenses. You turn a fight into an investigation. You are applying that break we talked about earlier.
So instead of saying, you never do the dishes, which is an attack, you say, I noticed the dishes are in the sink, and I'm assuming you left them there, but maybe I'm missing something. Or maybe we have different standards for when they should be done.
Exactly. It de-escalates everything. It
Yeah.
invites the other person to join you in looking at the reality. Rather than defending themselves against your accusation, you're inviting them to look at the slide under the microscope with you, rather than hitting them over the head with the microscope.
I like that image. Okay, lesson number 4. Archive the truth. This one is interesting. The freezer bag concept.
This is all about memory. We tend to trust our memories implicitly, but the source points out that our memories are actually terrible. They're constantly being rewritten by our current emotions.
Like the Golgi and Kajal thing, we rewrite the past to fit our current theory of the world.
Exactly. If you are mad at someone today, your brain will go back and edit your memories of last month to make them look like a villain. So the advice is to keep records, journal, write down what actually happened in a meeting immediately after it happens. Keep the data physically stored in a freezer bag, so to speak. Not so you can pull it out and say, I told you so, but so you don't gaslight yourself.
It's like being your own historian.
You need a reference point that doesn't change when your mood changes. Because in 6 months, you will remember that meeting very differently than how it actually happened. The ink on the page doesn't change. Your neurons do.
And finally, lesson number 5. Choose wisdom over winning.
This is the ultimate takeaway. In science, the goal isn't to destroy the other scientists, though Golgi certainly tried to do that. The goal is to understand nature. In life, we often fight just to win. But as the source says, winning an argument often means losing yourself.
Losing the relationship, losing your peace of mind.
Right. If you win the argument, but you had to distort the facts or bully the other person to do it, you failed the test of objectivity. You turned off the brake and drove off the cliff just to get across the finish line first. You might be standing on the podium, but the car is wrecked at the bottom of the ravine.
Man, this is heavy stuff, but it's also really freeing. It takes the pressure off being perfect. It suggests we don't have to be robots to be objective.
It really does. I think the biggest misconception we cleared up today is that objectivity is some kind of superpower that only geniuses have.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just a discipline. It's a hygiene practice.
Hygiene. I like that. It's like brushing your teeth. You don't do it once and you're done forever. You have to do it every day or things start to rot.
That's it. It doesn't kill subjectivity. Subjectivity is our instinct. It's who we are. But objectivity reduces its power over us. It's the difference between reacting like a raw nerve and responding like a conscious human being.
So to bring it all back to that final metaphor from the source, science, and maybe a good life, is sterile not because we are naturally clean.
But because we agree to wash our hands before we touch the truth.
That is going to stick with me. Wash your hands before you touch the truth. It sounds simple, but if everyone actually did that, the world would look very different.
It's a beautiful standard to live by. And it starts with recognizing that your hands are dirty in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive, but I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over. We've talked a lot about how memory and ego rewrite our past. But if every memory we have is subject to our current bias, how much of your own personal identity, the story of who you are, is just a poorly sterilized argument you keep telling yourself?
That is quite the question to end on.
Something to think about next time you catch yourself in the gray zone. If this conversation touched a nerve today, share it with someone. Maybe share it with someone you're currently arguing with, or just listen to it again for yourself.
Because sometimes we really don't need more information.
We just need a new way of looking. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.